My fiancée and her brother plotted to steal my $2 million business, but the laptop he left open revealed everything. Now he faces criminal charges while she fled the state. I'm 34 years old. I own a chain of organic grocery stores, and 3 weeks ago I canceled my wedding 2 months before the date because I discovered that my fiancé, or I guess my ex-fiancé now, was basically trying to steal my business. And when I say steal, I'm not exaggerating or being dramatic. She literally had a plan with her brother to take half of everything I've built over the last 10 years. But anyway, I guess I should start from the beginning because this whole story is absolutely insane. I met Rebecca about 2.5 years ago at a networking event. You know, one of those boring things where everyone pretends to be super interested in each other's businesses, but really they're just there for the free wine. She worked in social media marketing for fashion brands, and honestly, at first I thought she was amazing. She was smart, funny, ambitious, but not in a way that made me uncomfortable, you know what I mean? We started dating and everything was pretty normal for the first year, like dinners, weekend trips, meeting each other's families, all that typical serious relationship stuff. By that point, I already had 12 stores distributed across 3 states, and I'm not gonna lie, I'd done really well for myself. I started with just one store 10 years ago when I was 24. Basically put all my savings and a loan my uncle gave me into that first location, and little by little I grew. It wasn't overnight or anything like that. It was years of working like 12 hours a day, learning about distribution, negotiating with suppliers, all that stuff. But it was worth it. Because now the stores generate good income, and I have pretty ambitious expansion plans for the next 5 years. When Rebecca and I started talking about marriage about a year ago, I knew I had to protect the business. It wasn't anything personal against her. It was just common sense. You know, to my entire adult life for. So I brought up the prenup in a very direct and honest way. I told her, look, this doesn't mean I don't trust you or that I think we're going to get divorced, but it's a necessary protection for both of us. And she understood it perfectly, or at least that's what I thought at the time. We had several conversations about it and she was always super reasonable. She'd say things like, no, Michael, I totally understand. It's your business. You built it before you met me. It makes sense that you'd want to protect it. We even joked about it sometimes. She'd say she didn't know anything about organic grocery stores anyway, and that she'd be bored being involved in the business. My lawyer prepared a pretty standard agreement, where basically the business and everything related to it would remain as separate property, and Rebecca would be entitled to a reasonable amount if we got divorced after a certain amount of time being married, but nothing excessive, she reviewed it with her own lawyer, said everything seemed fair to her, and we signed the initial drafts. I thought everything was settled. But then, about 3 months ago, her brother Stephen came back to town. This guy, God, I don't even know where to start with Stephen. He's 37 years old and basically a human disaster. He's been married 3 times. All 3 ended in divorce because apparently he's a master at manipulating people and ruining relationships. He's also had like 5 different businesses that failed spectacularly, from a mobile app that nobody used to a gourmet coffee shop that closed in 6 months. The guy is always looking for the next big thing, the next way to get rich without actually working, you know what I mean? When Stephen showed up, Rebecca started to change. At first, it was small things that I didn't even really notice. She started spending more money, like buying designer clothes she'd never been interested in before, going to super expensive restaurants and suggesting, we go too. Then she started asking weird questions about the business, like how much each store grossed monthly, what my profit margins were, what plans I had for expansion. At first, I thought she was just showing interest because we were getting married, you know? Like she wanted to understand my work better. But the questions got more and more specific. And she started suggesting that I should give her a role in the company. Maybe managing social media or marketing for the stores. I told her it wasn't necessary, that I already had a team for that, and besides, she had her own job that was going really well. But she insisted. She'd say things like, but we're going to be married, we should build things together. And I'd respond that, yes, we could build a family together, a life together. But the business was something I'd started alone and wanted to keep it that way. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. All the signs were there, but I guess I was so focused on planning the wedding and a new store expansion that I didn't pay enough attention. 2 months ago, My lawyer called me to review the final version of the prenup before we officially signed it. He told me that Rebecca had requested some minor changes through her lawyer and that he wanted me to review them before proceeding. But when I saw the changes, I literally felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. They weren't minor changes. Not at all. The new agreement basically gave Rebecca 50% of the business in case of divorce, no matter when it happened, plus rights over any future expansion. There were also clauses about shared business decisions and access to all the company's financial accounts and documents from the moment of marriage. I called Rebecca immediately and said, "What is this? Why did you change the entire agreement without even talking to me first?" She acted like it was no big deal, told me her lawyer had suggested those modifications to better protect her, that they were standard changes, and that I was overreacting. I told her no, that they definitely weren't standard changes, that she was basically trying to get half of something I'd built years before I met her. She got defensive and we started fighting, and in the end she told me that if I really loved her I wouldn't have a problem sharing everything with her. That marriage was about being partners in everything. That conversation left me really uneasy. I talked to my lawyer the next day and told him I definitely wasn't going to sign that version of the agreement, that we were going back to the original version or there wouldn't be a wedding. My lawyer advised me to be careful, that this situation was a huge red flag, but I still had hope that we could work it out. I thought maybe her lawyer had advised her badly or that Stephen had put weird ideas in her head. I tried to talk to her several more times, but each conversation ended in a fight, and she insisted that I was being selfish and controlling. Things got worse when Rebecca showed up at my office, unannounced during an important meeting with potential investors for a new location. She walked in like it was nothing, interrupted the meeting, and introduced herself as my future wife and business partner. The investors were confused, and I was furious. After they left, I asked her what the hell she'd done, and she told me she had a right to be there, that it was going to be her business too soon, and that she needed to start familiarizing herself with the operations. I told her to leave and that we'd talk later, but she refused to go until my assistant Jennifer basically had to escort her out. At that point, Stephen had convinced Rebecca's entire family that I was a controlling and stingy guy who didn't want to share anything with his sister. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, who had always been super nice to me, suddenly started treating me differently, like with distrust. I got calls from Rebecca's father saying I should reconsider my position on the prenup, that his daughter deserved financial security. I tried to explain to him that she would have financial security, that the original agreement was generous, but he was already convinced that I was the bad guy in the story. I decided to do something that maybe wasn't the most ethical, but ended up being crucial. I invited Stephen for coffee, just the two of us, and basically let him talk. The guy can't keep his mouth shut when he thinks he's winning. I asked him casually what he thought about the whole prenup thing, and he started spilling everything. He told me that Rebecca was being very smart by making sure she had access to the business, that he'd suggested she ask for those changes because technically we were going to be family and families help each other. Then, without me asking anything specific, he started talking about how he could help manage some of the stores if Rebecca got her share of the business, that he had retail experience, even though he really had no real experience beyond his failed businesses. What Stephen didn't know is that I was recording the entire conversation on my phone. I don't know if it's legal or not, but honestly at that moment, I didn't care. I needed evidence of what was happening. And the guy basically confessed that it had all been his idea, that he'd convinced Rebecca that I was rich and that she had a right to a piece of that. That marriage was the perfect way to access my money and my business. He talked to me like we were accomplices, like I should understand his twisted logic. 2 days after that conversation, I discovered something even worse. My IT team informed me that someone had been accessing confidential company documents from my home network. When we investigated, it turned out Rebecca had been sharing detailed financial information about my stores with Stephen, including profit reports, supplier contracts, and my expansion plans. And not only that, we found Stephen literally going through papers in my office one afternoon when he thought I wasn't there. Jennifer discovered him and called security. When we confronted him, he tried to say that Rebecca had asked him to pick up some documents for me, a lie so obvious it was almost comical. That's when it was all over for me. There was no going back, no possible explanation that could fix this. Rebecca had betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible, and all because her loser brother had convinced her she had a right to my money. It wasn't love. It wasn't wanting to build a life together. It was literally a plan to steal what I'd worked years to build. I sent Rebecca a formal email, copying her lawyer and mine, canceling the wedding and ending our relationship. In the email, I attached evidence of the fraudulent prenup, the recording of my conversation with Stephen, where he admitted the plan, and the records of unauthorized access to confidential documents from my company. I gave her 72 hours to return everything she had related to my business and to move out of the apartment we shared, which, by the way, was in my name because I'd bought it 3 years before I met her. Rebecca's response was absolutely predictable and pathetic. First, she tried calling me like 50 times. Then she sent me text messages saying we could talk, that it was all a misunderstanding, that Stephen had confused her, but that she really loved me. I didn't respond to any messages. Then, in what was probably the worst decision of her life, she decided to go shopping with the emergency credit card I'd given her to use in case of, well, actual emergencies. In 3 days, she spent $122,000. $122,000. She bought designer bags, jewelry, clothes, even expensive furniture that she sent to her parents' house. When I saw the statement, I almost had a heart attack. I called her. It was the only time I talked to her directly after sending the email, and I asked her if she was completely insane. She yelled at me that it was her right, that we were going to get married, that she'd invested 2 years of her life in our relationship and deserved compensation. I told her no, that what she deserved was for me to sue her for fraud, but that I was going to be generous and simply cancel the card right then, during the call. And I did. I literally called the bank on conference while she was on the phone and canceled the card. I heard when she tried to use it 5 minutes later at another store, and it was declined because the store employee called Jennifer to confirm there was no system error. That's where the story takes an interesting turn, because it turned out that Rebecca's sister, Sarah, who had always been more sensible than the rest of the family, found Stephen's laptop at their parents' house. Stephen was apparently staying there and left the laptop open one day. Sarah, curious about the whole situation, looked through the files and found all the evidence of the complete plan. There were documents detailing step by step how they were going to convince Rebecca to change the prenup, how they were going to gain my trust to get business information, even spreadsheets projecting how much money they could get if they managed to have Rebecca get 50% in a quick divorce. Stephen had been planning this for months, since before I even officially proposed marriage. Sarah sent all the evidence to her parents and then sent it to me too. In the files, there were even conversations where Stephen admitted he'd contacted a corrupt lawyer to advise Rebecca badly about the prenup, making the changes seem normal when they were really completely abusive. There were notes about how to emotionally manipulate Rebecca, how to make me look like the bad guy, basically a complete manual on how to scam someone through marriage. When Rebecca's parents saw all this evidence, they finally understood what had happened. They called me to apologize, saying that Stephen had fooled them all, that they didn't know it was all an elaborate trap. I appreciated the apology, but honestly, the damage was already done. Their daughter had actively participated in this. No matter how much influence Stephen had, she made conscious decisions to betray me and try to rob me. Rebecca tried one last desperate move. She hired a new lawyer and sued me for emotional damages and breach of promise of marriage, claiming that I had used her and then left her with nothing. Her lawsuit asked for compensation of $300,000 for the time we'd been together and for the expenses she'd incurred preparing for the wedding. My lawyer almost laughed when he read the lawsuit, said it had no legal basis and that any judge would throw it out immediately, especially with all the evidence of fraud I had. We basically sent them a formal response with all the evidence attached and threatened to countersue for fraud, theft of intellectual property, and unauthorized access to confidential company information. Rebecca's lawsuit fell apart in 2 weeks. Her lawyer probably told her she had no chance and that moving forward would only sink her deeper. But Stephen didn't get off so clean from this. Turns out that in his attempts to access information about my business, he'd contacted some of my competitors trying to sell them confidential data about my operations. That technically constitutes corporate espionage, and my corporate lawyer decided to proceed with charges. As far as I know, Stephen is now facing criminal charges and probably a civil lawsuit too. I haven't followed that case very closely because honestly, I just want to forget about this whole family. Rebecca? The last time I heard anything about her was like 2 weeks ago. Sarah wrote to tell me that Rebecca had finally realized the magnitude of what Stephen had done, that she was devastated, and that she wanted to talk to me to apologize properly. I told Sarah I appreciated the message, but no, that I had no interest in ever talking to Rebecca again. Because here's the thing, and this is what Rebecca never understood, even after everything exploded, it wasn't just Stephen who betrayed me. She chose to participate in this. She chose to change the prenup without talking to me honestly. She chose to share confidential information about my business. She chose to interrupt my business meeting. She chose to spend $122,000 in a vengeful tantrum. Stephen didn't force her to do any of those things. He just gave her the ideas and she voluntarily executed them. I upgraded all my company's security after this, changed passwords, implemented two-factor authentication on everything, hired a security firm to review all our systems and find vulnerabilities. I also had difficult conversations with my team about trusting people too much who aren't directly involved in the business. Jennifer was incredible during all this. Basically, kept operations running while I dealt with the personal chaos. As for me, I'm okay. I'm not going to say I'm happy or that I've completely gotten over it, because discovering that the person you plan to spend your life with saw you as an ATM is something that hurts. But I'm relieved I found out before the wedding, and not after. Imagine if I'd married her, if we'd had kids, if I'd signed that fraudulent agreement without reviewing it carefully. I would have lost everything. My business, my money, years of my life trying to untangle myself from a legal nightmare. So yeah, I guess I was lucky in a way. I've gone back to focusing completely on the business, and honestly, we're growing faster than ever. I just closed a deal to open 3 new stores next year, and we're negotiating with some investors for a bigger expansion on the West Coast. Work has always been my refuge, and now more than ever, I appreciate having something I built on my own, something no one can take from me with manipulations or fraudulent documents. Would I trust someone again for a serious relationship? I don't know. Probably eventually, but I'm definitely going to be a lot more careful. And any woman I date in the future is going to have to accept a prenup even stricter than the original one. Rebecca rejected. I guarantee you that. Some people would say that's cynical, or that I'm letting this experience make me distrustful, but I see it as learning from mistakes and protecting what's mine. I worked too hard to build this, to risk it all again for romantic love, or for the idea that marriage means sharing absolutely everything. Last week, I ran into Sarah at a coffee shop and we talked briefly. She told me that Rebecca moved to another state, basically fleeing from the shame of everything that happened because the story spread everywhere in our social circles. Stephen is apparently facing his legal problems, and the family has basically disowned him finally, after years of tolerating his destructive behavior. Sarah apologized again for everything, and I told her it wasn't her fault. For that, in fact, I thanked her for sending me the evidence from the laptop because without that, I might have kept going back and forth on the matter without being completely sure of Rebecca's intentions. So that's my story. 2 years of my life that I thought I was building towards something meaningful turned out to be an elaborate scam orchestrated by a loser brother-in-law and executed by a woman who valued money more than any real connection we had. It's shit. I'm not gonna lie. But at least now I know exactly what kind of person Rebecca really was. And that's better than finding out 5 years later with divorce papers in hand and half my business at stake.